Apple is down over 10% over the last months. A lot of bad things have happened to Apple since my last video when I was very bearish on the stock. I gave it a price target of like $105, which is a very, very low price. But I have something different for this video because a lot of things have happened with Warren Buffett, with China, with the EV market that Apple was trying to enter, and many different things in Europe. I'm going to cover all of it in this video and give you a very quick update and my valuation model on the stock. Now, the first thing that happened with Apple, which a lot of people interpreted as something bearish, and Apple finally gave up on the whole thing with creating an EV. I think it was by 2030, and they're gonna replace over 2,000 workers. They're gonna pretty much reassign them to AI projects. A lot of people believe this is bearish. I think this is bullish for Apple because this industry is getting extremely competitive. You could look at Tesla's operating margins from 17.5% to pretty close to 8% as of the third quarter of 2023. Massive drop. Many other EV companies are struggling. They're experiencing some decline in sales or even declines in margins. Some of them are even quitting and they don't want to pursue this whole EV stuff. And it's getting very competitive. And I believe it's very hard for most companies to compete with Tesla. So I think Apple did the right thing. Instead of spending over $1 billion every single year on this project, this is an extra $1 billion in savings that could be used for buybacks, dividends, AI investments, doing something else. Maybe $1 billion is not much for a company like Apple, but it's still something. $1 billion is pretty good in terms of savings every single year. And I think if Apple really wants to enter the automotive industry, and I think this is what they're pretty much trying to do, as there's a new update coming in, and it's mainly with their CarPlay product. Over 98% of new cars in the United States, they come with CarPlay installed, and over 79% of US buyers would only buy a car that supports CarPlay. And this is a massive system that Apple could leverage, massive opportunity to create some kind of a software as a service product. It would be very high margin stuff, and they are making massive updates to the CarPlay. They're trying to integrate some kind of dashes and some things. There's a new update coming in. It's going to do all kind of fancy system on the dash, something within customizable within your phone and all these kind of things. And a lot of companies, they do have their own system like Tesla does. Tesla does not use CarPlay, I think. But most of the other companies, they do use CarPlay because they would have to spend a lot of money trying to create and maintain their own system. It's much more efficient to use CarPlay, and people love CarPlay because they have iPhones. And it could be a massive opportunity. So this is why I'm not really mad that Apple is not going to create an EV. I think this is good news for the stock, and I wish they would have gave up on this idea earlier. The second bad thing that happened to Apple is a $2 billion antitrust fine in Europe between Spotify and Apple, something around music and licensing and all these things. I did not look deep into it, but over a $2 billion fine. It also caused a big sell-off in the stock. The third thing, which I believe is the worst one, is the massive declines in China. For the first 6 weeks of 2024 versus 2023, Apple declined 24%. Versus the Chinese brand, which I believe is Huawei, I think this is how you pronounce it or whatever, is up 64%. So 64% versus a decline of 24% for Apple in China. This is a very bad trend if it does continue, and China is a huge market for Apple. So this is not a good sign at all, and I'm not sure what's going to happen in the future. But Apple is not doing well in China in 2024. Something else that also happened, and people consider it bearish, is Warren Buffett, which, as you know, owns a massive stake in Apple. Warren Buffett has sold some Apple stock. He trimmed like 1% of his position in Apple as of the latest 13F filing. I don't think he sold before since he bought it. This is, I think, the first time he sold Apple over 1% trim. It's still a huge position for him, but a lot of people consider it as bearish, that maybe Warren Buffett believes the stock is overvalued because of the growth, which leads me to the final negative point with Apple. There's a lot going on, and I think it's one of the worst ones, and it's just the growth. I mean, Apple has not been growing since late 2022. It grew 8.1% in September 2022, then they declined 5%, 2.5%, declined 1.4%, declined 0.7%, and they finally grew 2% as of the last quarter. This is a good trend. I like the improvement, But Apple has not been massively growing revenue, only a 2% revenue in the last quarter, and analysts expect a 1% revenue growth for 2024, which is really, really bad whenever you have a company that's priced at a high multiple of 25.5 times earnings. I mean, 25.5 times earnings was 1 to 2% growth, but you have a company like Google priced at 19 times forward earnings, growing EPS 13 to 15%. So Apple's growth is very concerning for the valuation, and this is one of the reasons why the stock has been declining. The mean multiple has been 25 times earnings over the last 5 years, now sitting at 25 times. It's finally at least close to the mean multiple. It wasn't as of my last video, and now I'm going to show you my valuation model to give you my fair value on the stock. I used 5% growth average between 2024 to 2028. This is the trickiest part because estimates are all over the place, like 1% for 2024, 6% for 2025, and then I have a 15% jump in 2028. I'm not sure why. I mean, it's really messed up numbers, but from me looking at the trend and looking at the average, I think 5% is fair between 2024 to 2028 on average. I think you could agree with me on this, and it's very low. The current net income margin is 25%. Apple has been improving profitability massively. You could look at the last quarter. Revenue is up 2%, but net income is up 15%, and net income margins are improving. They are expected to hit 27%. So I'm pricing in a net income margin expansion from 25 to 27%, 25 times earnings, which is the mean multiple. Although I believe it's expensive, but I'm just trying to illustrate an example. So using 25 times earnings and a 4% dividend, which is not a dividend, it's mainly a buyback yield because the company has been buying back around 3.5% of the market cap over the last few years, and they do pay a small dividend. So I put in a 4% dividend. In total, if you buy Apple today at this price, after the 10% decline, your upside would be around 46% or 8.7% CAGR, which is pretty much the average return of the S&P 500. If I want to double my money with Apple stock, I would have to buy it at $107 per share. At $107 per share, I mean, I'm not sure if Apple is going there. I'm just being honest, because this is over a 33% decline, even closer to a 35% decline. But I'm just not seeing how it could be better for Apple. And even if Apple does trade at 30 times earnings, if we assume it does, in this case, you would have to buy Apple at $128 to double your money over the next 5 years. So if I was desperate to own Apple, which I'm not, if I was desperate to own Apple, I would not pay more than $130, $129, which still be a pretty decent decline. The decline would be pretty close to 23, 22% from here. I'm not sure if this is going to happen or not. I'm being very honest, but it did happen many times before, as you could see in the chart. I would not be surprised if it does happen. But to me, I know a lot of people keep saying Apple is overvalued and it keeps going up, but this is not going to keep happening forever. And I think Apple is overvalued, and I just see at least a 20% drop from here for me to consider buying it. But if I was an Apple shareholder with a cost basis of below 120, I would not be worried. I would just dollar cost average down. It's not financial advice, just my opinion on Apple. I'm just not impressed at all, just being honest. Thank you for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please press the like button and maybe consider subscribing. So I hope to see you in another video.